Hi, everybody. Ian Bremmer here, and the big news that the longest government shutdown in recorded history in the United States is about to be over, 42 days and counting. The Senate last night voting in favor of ending the shutdown. Some 8 Democratic senators breaking ranks with their colleagues to vote with the Republicans. President Trump hailing it as a victory. Many Democrats immediately complaining, criticizing, particularly leadership Chuck Schumer in the Senate. Democrats, of course, a lot of infighting, always a lot of differentiation inside that caucus, and always self-criticizing as being able to snatch defeat from the jaws of victory. Having said that, it had been a pretty good week for the Democrats. They outperformed in recent elections just last week in New York and in Virginia and in New Jersey, and of course on the referendum for redistricting in California. In all of those cases, performing better than they might have expected, and even President Trump saying that he lost elections and making excuses. Well, it's because he wasn't on the ballot and people are lying about the economy and all of that. But still, the headlines there are good for the Democrats. And Democrats weren't being criticized for the shutdown, at least not as much as the Republicans. So why not pocket the win while you have some momentum? Big Democratic issues are that they just lack coordination as a party. So you'd be much better off if, when the Democrats decide to break and support ending the shutdown, if the nominal leadership, the senior people across the party, both their opinion leaders as well as those that are likely to be running for the presidency, all say, okay, we're together, this is the right thing to do. That's, of course, not the case. There was immediate criticism from just about every corner, lots of internal yelling, whether it's Jon Stewart or Ezra Klein or Gavin Newsom, and on and on and on. Some of them were demanding, sort of concessions from the Republicans that they were never going to get, like support for the Affordable Care Act. That just was not at any point in the cards and wasn't going to be. Some of them wanted an existential fight, shut it down no matter how long, just cause pain, cause damage because you're so opposed to President Trump. But most of them were never going to be up for that. Democrats did show that they have influence, a party that hadn't been able to do much of anything for the bulk of this year, were able to stick together and lead to the longest government shutdown that the U.S. has ever experienced. Furthermore, President Trump pushed on ending the filibuster because he was getting frustrated, and his own senators refused to support it. People like John Thune, well respected in the Republican caucus, saying not going to do that because the Democrats will come in and they'll do the same thing to us. Then you have people like Ted Cruz saying, what, are you kidding me? Of course, the Democrats come back and Manchin, Sinema aren't there anymore, so they're going to do the same thing. So why don't we take advantage now? And Trump gets frustrated about that. So for all of those reasons, the Democrats in the run-up to last night's vote were looking better than they had. I mean, their popularity remains incredibly low, lower than Trump's, whose popularity is also low. But the fact that they've clipped the president's wings a bit, and now you've got another big fight coming, not from the Democrats, but from the Supreme Court, specifically on trade and IEPA, which is the this trade regulation that Trump has used to basically strip control of tariffs from Congress, where it has historically sat, to the executive by declaring that every tariff he puts on, no matter for what reason, no matter on what country, no matter how big, how small, is for national security emergency purposes. It's pretty clear from the opening lines of questioning and arguments from the Supreme Court justices that many of them are very skeptical of this. And indeed, Trump has posted in anger that the Supreme Court doesn't know what they're doing and is undermining him. So if that were the case, that would really undermine Trump's ability to negotiate tough deals with a lot of other countries around the world, where he'd have to change suddenly the tariffs that he's putting on them. It would take time. In some cases, that would lead to reductions. It would improve the leverage of those countries. And then further, Trump's performance right now on the economy, which was a big piece of why he won in last year's elections, are now increasingly underwater. They're some of his worst numbers because inflation continues to be a little higher than target, likely to increase over present months because so many companies in the retail space have resisted increasing and passing along the higher costs of the goods that are coming in. A lot of those goods were pre-positioned for 6 to 12 months after the tariffs were put in place, but those stockpiles are running out, and almost everyone you talk to in this space, at least privately, because they don't want to say publicly that it's because of the tariffs, that increases are coming, some 3-5%, some 10-15% or more. Trump is not going to like that one bit. Consumer sentiment is down, the worst you've seen in decades in the U.S., and also housing costs are way up, not just because of the cost of the house themselves, but also because mortgage interest rate payments are way up. That's why Trump was talking about a 50-year mortgage as opposed to 30, which looks like that's going to be a non-starter. So clearly frustrated and talking a lot about, well, this is just a con from the Democrats. It's not really more expensive. And certainly there is some truth to the fact that over the last years, how voters feel about the economy, aligned with whether or not their political side happens to be in office, has mattered as much or more than the way the economy is actually performing, at least in terms of their consumer sentiment. But the numbers do matter. So while Trump is correct that there are some vibes here and there is some negative sentiment coming out from those that oppose him, it's also true that as of right now, the economy is not doing well. And the fact that Trump is suddenly pivoting and the White House communications secretary pivoting towards talking about affordability, which hadn't been on his lips in the first months of his presidency, but was how Zoran Mamdani won in New York, and now suddenly a week later he's all about affordability, implies that he has not been aligned with the zeitgeist of the average American voter of late. So for all of those reasons, there is a level of vulnerability. And I mean, I've said over the past weeks that I think that the leveling of the East Wing is not an issue I'm particularly concerned about. I did think a conference facility is a good idea. I don't really care all that much that he circumvented, sort of the appropriate bureaucracy compared to so many other things that are happening. But the fact that billionaires are providing money to create this incredible, sort of Versailles type for Washington facility, while he's putting gold all over the Oval Office and more broadly, is not a good look when Americans at the working and middle class level are having a harder time making ends meet. So affordability is a tough thing to talk about when the president is so proud of all of the gold in the White House. And in that regard, this is a message that he is likely to be vulnerable on going forward. Certainly the fact that Trump doesn't talk about draining the swamp anymore because he's become the swamp and the oligarchs are him and family and so many of the people that are donating big money to ensure that they get favors politically. None of that's new, but it's a lot more in your face and significant in today's economic environment and perception than it was during Trump's first term. So all of that is interesting. I know that all of us in the United States are happy to hear that the government is no longer shut down, in part because the dysfunction is sad, and in part because watching all these people sit for hours and hours, even longer than the normal hours of delays in Newark Airport, is really sad as we get close to the holidays and the weather turns. So that's it for me. I'll talk to you all real soon. Be good.